combined in one toothpaste.
Fluoride for fighting cavity and a gel for fresh breath.
Thanks. We'll get Aquafresh, too.
Double protection Aquafresh. Recognized by the Canadian Dental Association.
It's like a mirror.
That's good.
You mean you can get my whole house so clean?
Well, now, did he? The only thing he's done in 10 years.
Where my name's not Mr. Clean.
Well, you proved you're terrific on floors. Other liquids didn't clean nearly as well, let alone shine. Powder's clean fine, but I'd have to rinse to get that shining. Clean got it so clean it shines, like a mirror. How are you going to get my whole house that shining?
With Mr. Clean, straight from the bottle. On the rest of the kitchen.
I can see myself.
Don't forget the bathroom, sinks and tubs and tiles.
You're right, that shines.
Even bathroom chrome.
Like a mirror. The whole bathroom's so clean it shines. With just Mr. Clean.
2-year growth rate.
Shall we start on the outside?
900 million.
Mr. Clean will clean your house.
15 seconds to opening a program.
Like a mirror. Mr. Clean, Mr. Clean.
Shit, that's better.
Webster is next on BCTV.
Good morning, said he with a smile on his face, somewhat forced, because this is a day I'm going to interview Hugh Curtis, the Finance Minister of British Columbia's Social Critic government, with his bad news budget, harsh reality, the take from personal taxation, you and me and the corporations, up what looks to me like $1 billion. Increase in expenditures 16.7. And one thing it might well do, and Mr. Curtis might well concede, is harden the climate, the already unhappy climate of labor relations in British Columbia. Morning, Mr. Curtis.
Good morning, Jack. How are you?
Very well indeed, thank you. And after you on the program, I shall have a session with Dave Stupich, the NDP Financial Critic. But first, for Mr. Curtis to explain and defend his $6.6 billion budget after the break. You must be very unhappy this morning, Mr. Curtis, Minister of Finance, in introducing your budget yesterday, and I think you might concede to me right off the top that the heavy load of additional taxation on people is going to stiffen the already troublesome labor strife-ridden climate in British Columbia. True or false?
Jack, I think that, first of all, when you opened the program this morning, you referred to $1 billion more in taxes. That figure is out by quite a margin. It's around 600 million additional revenue measures which are being taken.
I'm just a simple little man, Mr. Curtis, and it says in your tables that your taxation revenues are up $1 billion.
Well, you're comparing two things, and almost apples and oranges. Last year, if you look at the Blue Book, the so-called estimates book, with which you're very familiar,
right?
Plus the bill funding which we undertook last year for a number of project initiatives, you must compare that with the estimate figure for this year, because we're trying for greater clarity, and there are no bills, well, there's one bill, but that's about it. No bill funding this year, so much greater clarity, and therefore there is an apple and orange answer to that. But you said that I must be feeling very badly. Jack, I think that any member of this government, any Minister of Finance, would feel very badly if yesterday in the legislature of British Columbia I had to announce severe program cuts. If you've looked at a lot of budgets over the years, and you can't just say that you're a simple man in that regard. 66% of our budget in the coming fiscal year relates to human resources, health, and education, those three ministries. 66% of the total budget, not the increase. And one other figure I would like to offer to you, and then we can carry on as you wish. 48% increase in 2 years in the Ministry of Health costs in the last 2 years. or in the last year and taking into account next year. A 48% increase in that ministry alone. That's the kind of problem that we're wrestling with. We're not going to close beds. We're not going to shut down schools. We're not going to cut back on services to the elderly, to those who are disadvantaged. That was one choice, and we opted not to take that choice. That would have been really bad news for British Columbians.
I'm the first to concede that the cost of health this year is positively fearsome. It comes to about 33% of your expenditures. And you probably will tell me now that you have not got a secret reserve to meet any additional demands from the BC Medical Association, who are threatening us with extra billing.
We haven't tucked money away to any extent at all in this budget. It is an open budget. It is a budget which is, in plain language, we're working toward an easier understanding of budget. This is not written for chartered accountants, with all respect to that profession. The document and the supporting material has been prepared for the people of British Columbia to sit down and examine objectively and at their leisure. There's some good news in this budget.
Before you come to the good news, though, I do smell a rat, with all respect and deference, Mr. Curtis. I notice that you have dropped your estimated revenues from natural resources by something like $340 million. Petroleum and natural gas down $160 million, perhaps partly because of the mild winter. Forest revenues down $181 million. Are we not back at the old social credit ploy of underestimating your revenues and overestimating some of your expenditures?
That would be a reasonable guess if it were not for the fact that in this ministry, at the deputy minister's level and the senior officials level, and certainly at my level in the Ministry of Finance, we do not want to play games with the people of British Columbia in any way, shape, or form. It is their money. Now, we have not only the Ministry of Finance estimate with respect to the revenues which we hope will come next year, and that figure is low. It's a pessimistic figure. But that is supported also by the Ministry of Energy, Mines, and Petroleum Resources. That's a completely independent assessment of the situation, and from British Columbia Petroleum Corporation, and to a certain extent from the industry alone.
I know well that
I want to reassure you and your viewers that we are not playing games. I'm not in this business to play games and to produce figures which are really not supportable. If we are wrong, if we are unduly pessimistic, then I will be the first to admit that we were that unduly pessimistic. But I don't think that will be the case, Jack.
You will concede, though, that it looks like the old social credit ply.
Well, those are your words. All I'm saying is that
they used to be your words too, Mr. Curtis.
Pardon?
They used to be your words too.
Do you have that on quote? I don't know. Jack, I know the considerations that went into this budget with the officials in my ministry. We started work in December on this.
I'll believe you on that for the moment, at least until next year, Mr. Curtis. But now,
well, I'll remember what you said, and I think we can have an interesting discussion at that time.
Yes, we can. Now, Mr. Curtis, give me the bad news on our personal load of taxation to balance your incredible budget at $6.6 billion, which is up in expenditure, if these tables are right, by 16.7%.
Well, again, the 16.7% refers to the last year where we had the estimates in the Blue Book plus the bill funding.
Let's take 13%.
It's more likely around in the neighborhood of 12%.
Right. But, okay. Now the bad news.
Okay. Well, what would you like to talk about? The increase in the social services tax.
First of all, sir, no increase in the homeowner grant. No relief from those hit by very heavy assessments in the lower mainland who feel that they're going to be paying for education in other parts of the province. Why no increase in the homeowner grant?
Well, first of all, in answer to that, I think it's very important to acknowledge, and I'm sure that you will acknowledge that we've further reduced the assessed value for taxation purposes on residential property throughout British Columbia. We dropped down to 11% for 1981 assessment stroke taxation purposes. That is a significant assist to residential property owners in many parts of British Columbia. In fact, we've been criticized in a few parts of the province for the fact that that has come down so much that the assessment is going to be lower than it was last year on a typical residential property, pushing a shift onto commercial and industrial properties. So please, when you're discussing the fact that there is no money for an increase in the homeowner grant, and we have expanded homeowner grant at 630 to all eligible handicapped, when you say that there's no increase in the homeowner grant, I think you will be fair and your viewers will be objective and say, but at least there was action taken to further reduce the property tax impact through the assessment factor.
Now, sales tax.
Sales tax, it has been at 7. It was at 4. We've increased it to 6. And I think, again, it is important to compare that with sales taxes applied in other provinces and in other states. The sales tax produces per point or per percentage about $197 million. There's a long list, a very impressive list now, of items which we purchase on a day-to-day basis which are not subject to social services tax. And I'll be frank, earlier on in the considerations of the budget, we looked at a number of things which have been taxed earlier or are taxed elsewhere. Meals, any kind of restaurant meal. Food, we said no, we would not do that. Books and magazines and newspapers, periodicals, no, we would not tax those. An amusement tax. I don't like the term, but that's the common term. This is adding a tax in many jurisdictions to the cost of seeing a basketball game, seeing a film, and you know all about the amusement
Right,
tax.
so now what about the gasoline increase, which looks quite horrendous? It's something like, what is it? How much a gallon? 6 point some cents a gallon? And tied to the federal increases in the basic pre-tax price so that you will benefit from each rise in the basic price of gasoline?
Yeah, it's ad valorem. It's the kind of system which is used in other provinces, and incidentally, I'll be interested in the socialist response to that, because the same kind of ad valorem tax system is in place in the province of Saskatchewan. And that, I think, will not be lost on a number of your viewers.
How much does it put it up a gallon at the moment, as of now, Mr. Curtis?
Well, I'm doing my best, reluctantly and with some resistance to switching to metric, but it's several cents a gallon.
It's about between 6 and 7 cents a gallon.
Yeah.
And that will increase.
Jack, part of that is an attempt to encourage energy conservation. No government can or should tell people how to drive or how far they should drive or how much gasoline they should use. But I think that we really must recognize the need for energy conservation wherever and whenever possible in our daily lives.
How much do you hope to get out of the poor, non-complaining cigarette smokers and drinkers, Mr. Curtis? Because you can just hammer them. Nobody has any sympathy for them.
Well, we proposed, not by a tax increase, but through markups, we proposed to raise another $28 million in liquor sales in the course of the year. That works out to about 3% in terms of total cost. I think that's relatively minor. Cigarettes, and I'm a smoker as well, cigarettes, we have moved hard against cigarettes. It will be one of the higher prices for cigarettes, one of the higher tax rates for cigarettes in the country. And that's a significant increase. But I also think, perhaps at your leisure, you would like to discuss some of the good news in the budget. You're focusing on all the negatives.
Certainly will, Mr. Curtis,
Okay.
but let's just finish on the bad news. You've helped small business. You'll tell me about that in the next segment.
Yes.
But you put up the corporation tax, the highest in the country, from 15 to 16%.
Larger firms, corporation tax has increased from 15 to 16%, that's correct.
Next, the good news, if Mr. Curtis can find any for us after the break. To Mr. Curtis, it's certainly not a pre-election budget, but I do want to give you the fullest opportunity to tell me what is the good news.
Jack, one point I think that is particularly important and which has not been dealt with in much of the coverage I have seen since, or that I've read or heard since yesterday afternoon, relates to a personal provincial income tax credit.
Right.
Now, this will have a maximum effect for the elderly, but it is directed towards the low-income taxpayer, the lower-income taxpayer. And the breakout point, I think, is in the neighborhood of 14,000. I'm just checking that one figure.
Fine.
16,000 with a family of 4. Now, that is very significant, and it is effective this year. And a typical credit would be, or the maximum credit, in fact, if married with 2 children under 18, that means a saving of $214 on provincial income tax.
That will be
about 75%, Jack, of the elderly taxpayers in British Columbia will benefit this year from that credit. Again, it was an ability to pay budget, and that's why we, having had to take some difficult measures in order to maintain programs for British Columbians, on the other side of the ledger, we wanted to assist those who are less able to pay than most of us. The 10% surtax on the higher incomes is not good news for those who pay a higher income, but I think it starts building an element of equity into the budget. And that's a 10% surtax on those who earn $50,000 or more. I won't, as others have in the past, make reference to your earnings, but it certainly recognizes an ability to pay.
It's 10% on the applicable rate. I thought I saw above $37,000 income, taxable income. Am I right?
Yeah, well, I was speaking in gross amounts of about a $50,000.
About $50,000. Okay,
$50,000.
That's good news
earnings.
for the old people.
Well, it's good news. That's good news for the elderly and for about 40% of provincial income taxpayers in the lower bracket, and that's, I think, very significant.
Right.
Now,
So what other good news have you got for us?
The cut in the small business income tax rate, it was 12, it came down to 10, and now it's down to 8, and there are about 25,000 small businesses. The basis of commercial activity in British Columbia relates to smaller firms, and a reduction from 10 to 8% there, I think, is very important for those people who have a lot of pressures in today's commercial world.
Right. What else is good, sir?
Well,
I can't think of anything else that's good, but I'm giving you every opportunity so to tell me.
It's very, very kind of you to do that. We looked at further exemptions in sales tax, and while it may not apply to a number of people, certainly the removal of sales tax on all yard goods and patterns for clothing use. We had a lot of pressure from a number of people about 12 to 14 months ago suggesting that we should exempt the material required for the making of children's clothing and patterns. Now, that's not administratively possible, so we were able to expand it. And I gather that, that's a very important activity and a very crucial activity in many families. That's going to result in a tax saving of about $7.1 million in the coming year in terms of tax that would be paid with respect to the purchase of clothing.
Good.
What else is good news? I was about to go back to say again, look, we had 3 choices. First of all, start going into debt simply to pay our bills for this year, and that is deficit financing, and that is the problem that we face in Ottawa. $1,500 per British Columbia household, Jack, is going for debt retirement at the federal level. And I don't want to leave that as a legacy, no matter how long or how short I stay in the Ministry of Finance. I'm not going to leave that as a legacy for those who come along later.
Mind you, I might put in an economic philosophical note there, sir, that you put aside a fair amount of money for part of your infrastructure on the Northeast Coal, and perhaps we're getting to a state where the load is so heavy now, today, that we could afford to finance in a deficit fashion a little bit until the great bonanza comes in from the unlimited sale of Northeast Coal and Southeast Coal to the Japanese and others. Perhaps we've got to that stage.
It would lead to a philosophical discussion, but in terms of borrowing for capital projects, for hydro, for British Columbia Rail, for the Crown corporations, those things which are going to be here and used for many, many years, That, I think, is one particular part of the equation. The other part is simply spending more each year than we earn. It won't work in your family, it won't work in a business, and it certainly won't work in government. That's the problem in Ottawa. That's the problem in many jurisdictions now, and it's unacceptable. It's easy, Jack, it's very easy, it's palatable, because you just start sliding into it.
Two other small points there. Is it not good news, despite the fact that you're accused again of Ottawa bashing, that you are getting from Ottawa, and I'm sure this figure is right, an extra $120 million from the enemy in Ottawa? Is that not good news?
Well, you say $120 million.
Contributions from other governments in Canada, 127.2.
Yeah, but we have an even more worrisome aspect to that whole question, and that is at the end of March next year, the established programs financing agreement,
right,
5-year agreement, comes to an end. And that sends hundreds of millions of dollars to British Columbia, as to other provinces. And we have no details from Ottawa, but we understand there are going to be cuts. That is extremely bad news. If, in fact, that is not resolved, then we're going to be in very serious difficulty in next year's budget.
How much have you got up your sleeve which you're not sending to Ottawa on the 30% or 30 cents per 1,000 cubic feet Export of Natural Gas Tax Act? You must have some money in the kitty you have not been sending to Ottawa.
Jack, I don't have that figure readily available, I'm sorry.
And that's probably in the hands of the BC Petroleum Corporation.
Yeah, I just don't have that figure right off the top of my head.
Do you agree with me, Mr. Curtis, that this is not any form of election budget?
Well, I didn't approach it on the basis of it should be or should not be an election budget. I approached it on the basis, and it is my budget, I approached it on the basis of I was not going to be a party to severe program cuts upon which many British Columbians have come to depend.
Well, that's good news. No program cuts.
No program cuts.
You may run into trouble with the doctors, but for the moment there are no program cuts.
No program cuts.
Not of any kind.
But I'm going to insist, and that's the word, that's the key word, insist on greater efficiency, increasingly greater efficiency from the program managers, from everyone in government, including my colleagues. And if I become unpopular with my colleagues in the course of the next year, then I will realize that I am fulfilling the assignment which was given to me in the finance portfolio. Because there are economies, efficiencies, which can be undertaken on a day-to-day, ministry by ministry, department by department basis.
Is there a freeze on hiring still or now?
No. The hiring freeze was introduced in late June, early July last year. It was in place for a relatively short space of time while ministries delivered other savings for us. There is, overall, in the new budget, there is something in excess of $60 million in terms of salary savings. I'm going to insist, once more is the word insist, that we function as effectively and efficiently as we possibly can on behalf of the people we are elected to serve or that we serve through the public service.
One broad point before I go to the phones, Mr. Curtis, and that is this. Pretend I'm a union leader. Here I come into negotiations now. I may already be on strike, or I may be the IWA. The IWA are going to go into negotiations saying that government in Victoria is hammering us on sales tax. It's putting up the price of cigarettes and booze, and at our level in the IWA, we're not getting any preferred tax credit. Is this not going to add another irritant to the troubled labour negotiations in British Columbia as of this moment?
There are a number of irritants for both the trade union movement and for management in British Columbia at this time, and it was recognized quite some time ago that it would be a difficult year. The inflationary impact of this budget and the increases which have been introduced is not that significant.
12%?
I think that researchers who enter the bargaining process will want to be very sure that they have an accurate figure with respect to the impact this budget has on the average British Columbian, the wealthy British Columbian, and the less wealthy British Columbian, because it's not going to, certainly not going to be, no one is going to be able to say that this is contributing significantly to inflation in British Columbia.
Is there any money for additional low-cost housing of any kind in the budget, sir? A question I don't know the answer to.
We are moving as quickly as possible through the Ministry of Lands, Parks and Housing with respect to the northeast sector of the Greater Vancouver Regional District. Thousands of lots in the Coquitlam area. That's been spoken of before.
Right.
Our problem is a shortage of land. And therefore, I know that my colleagues, particularly Jim Chabot, are directing their attention and their activities towards providing that kind of land so that there is a lessening in the demand or the competitive aspect of lots just escalating so dramatically. That will help not only in the ownership situation, but it will also have an indirect but significant impact on the tenant or rental situation.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Don't go away. We're going to do one segment of telephone calls, if you don't mind, immediately after the break. Mr. Curtis, I may or may not have time for the phones. There are a couple of things I must clarify with you.
Sure.
I did not understand what you said in relation to the 11% on home assessments. How does that affect the vastly increased assessments, especially in the Lower Mainland area? That I don't understand at all.
Okay. When you receive your assessment notice on a residential property, it shows the actual value.
Right.
That's one particular box, and
Right.
it may show that the actual value is $120,000.
Right.
Then we factor, through the assessment authority, we factor that to the taxable assessment. And it could be 20%, it could be 6%, it depends on how much money has to be generated by each municipality. We were looking at 14% as the taxable assessment last year when the escalation in property prices, in residential prices, really took off. It had been climbing, but then it just skyrocketed. So we reduced that from 14 to 11. And that decision was taken in time for this assessment year. It follows, therefore, that if you are paying a smaller percentage on the property tax, the total property tax requirement of a municipality, residentially, that it's going to result in some savings. If we had left it at 14%, it would be 14% of $120,000 on the typical example. Instead, it's 11%. That's a significant cut.
You mean the mill rate will be on 11% of $120,000?
No. The assessment rate applied
for
against.
tax purposes.
Now, the mill rate is largely the responsibility of the elected council and the elected school board, and of course you know that.
And how much they want to raise, and of course you have
and how cautious they are going to be in their budgeting.
The school trustees were telling me they would hope you would change the mill rate from 41% to...
Oh, okay. Well, on that particular one, we have a provisional mill rate. We're required by law in December to announce a provisional mill rate, and Brian Smith, Minister of Education, will be announcing the final mill rate in April. That's his jurisdiction, and I don't know what it will be, but the provisional mill rate is down slightly. Not to a significant extent, but it is down for 1981 over 1980. But that's the provisional rate.
Now, you were only joking, I presume, when you made a reference to the fact that if things get too tough with Ottawa, we might set up our own tax collecting system. You wouldn't do that, would you?
Well, it's not unique in Canada.
Quebec.
Quebec and Alberta for corporation income tax, just going into place now. We would have to give 3 years' notice to terminate the tax agreement. I think it's important. We have notified Ottawa of this, and it's important to indicate that that is a possibility, that we might find that we have to do that. Others have said it, and it's correct. We send too much money to Ottawa only to have it come back in shrunken condition.
Does the harsh reality of this budget slow down your plans to ask Ottawa for hundreds of millions of dollars for Stadium and BC Place and Pier BC and all your concrete developments, or will these be done under separate Crown Corporation borrowings, hopefully with Ottawa's assistance?
Well, first of all, hundreds of millions of dollars suggests that it's a major consideration in this budget. We have already put money aside for British Columbia Place and for the Vancouver and Victoria Convention Centers. That money was put aside earlier. Now, it's not all the money that is required, but I think that those projects would be of benefit to all of Canada, and other ministers, federally and provincially, would want to speak about that. But that's a relatively small amount compared to the total tax sharing agreements which are in existence between the federal government and the provinces, plural, all provinces.
Psychologically, it's very tough for you to hold back certain energy collections for Ottawa and then go to them with outstretched hand and say, give us money for this, give us money for that, isn't it? Very difficult.
Well, there's a very important legal point, and I'm not legally trained, but the question of one government taxing another, or the Crown Corporation of another, I think is something which has been dealt with far more adequately by other ministers speaking on behalf of British Columbia. And once that happens, then I think we're into a very serious situation.
Well, now, with Mr. Stupich in the wings, I can't go to phones, but I want to give you one more opportunity to sum up between the two of us. You're not happy with your own budget. You feel it's full of harsh realities. You've accepted a 12 to 13% inflation rate in the budget to meet this year's costs, correct?
Yes, but we also see a real growth in British Columbia in 1981
because the place is booming.
Pardon?
Despite the strikes, the place is booming.
This is the very difficult situation in which we find ourselves. The province, the people, everything in British Columbia is booming, to use your word. Things have never been better on a province-wide basis. Things are going very, very well. The government is caught in an expenditure squeeze, expenditures up and revenues down for a variety of reasons. And that's a very vital difference. I spent some time in the speech yesterday dealing with that. That is of concern to us. And I make the point again that we are not going to borrow simply to keep the place running in the course of this year or any year. Deficit financing is too easy. I could be sitting here smiling today, Jack, and being the smooth politician and saying it's great, we didn't have to put up taxes, but there's a debt, and the debt would have to be picked up over and over again. Once a government gets into the habit of debt, then it never gets out of it. And I don't want to leave that for those who come along later.
The guaranteed debt, of course, of the province is now approaching $8 billion, but that is supposedly self-liquidating one way or another.
And it's for capital projects, and your viewers and you know there's a significant difference there. I'm speaking of if a family earns $25,000 but spends $30,000 in a year, sooner or later that family is going to be in very severe difficulty.
Right, sir. Just to add up again, sales tax up to 6%, gasoline up 7 cents a gallon.
Small business tax down.
Small business tax down, corporation tax up, preferred income tax credit for the low-wage earner and the elderlies, booze and cigarettes up $28 million, and, of course, to encourage the convention centre, an increase in the hotel tax to 8%, is it, for rooms of more than $50?
That's correct, Joe.
Will that be used to help finance PBC?
No. We're not vacating that tax sphere at all. If you look at hotel taxes which are charged in other jurisdictions, I think that it's fair that those who visit British Columbia contribute towards the cost of providing a variety of services.
Geez, I'm glad I don't write headlines. I'd be saying, soak the rich, milk the tourist.
Well, Jack...
I'm only half joking.
Okay.
Mr. Curtis, you don't have an easy job. Thank you for your patience. Next, Dave Stupich, the NDP Finance Critic. My thanks to Hugh Curtis, the Minister of Finance, who will now be subjected to the slings and arrows of the opposition in the House during the budget debate.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you. Next, Dave Stupich. Morning, Mr. Stupich.
Good morning, Jack.
I didn't get my budget documents until just about 3 minutes to 9, so you're obviously going to be better informed than me.
You read them more quickly than I do. You've had more practice.
In dissecting the documents. Now, I went after Curtis fairly hard on his bad news budget. What did I miss?
Well, I think you covered the field. I suppose the one thing that you didn't refer to too much that I saw was the Ottawa bashing. It started in last year's budget and rattled again this year. 5 years ago, the Socreds introduced a rash of tax increases. They blamed it all on the outgoing NDP administration. This year, they're introducing similar tax increases to bring in far more money, and they're blaming it all on Ottawa. It would seem they always have to find some kind of scapegoat instead of looking to their own devices.
Mind you, they're stuck. I think we must be quite frank. They're stuck with heavy labour negotiations, wage rates going up in the public service. Would you have come in with any less of an increase than theirs and a 13% inflation factor up the budget?
Well, I suppose I wouldn't have offended organized labor by saying to them, I want you to hold the line at the same time as I'm proposing to increase expenditures by $1 billion. Apart from that, I would not have given away the resource industries that were built up under the NDP administration and were given away. In Saskatchewan, for example, where they have resources to dwell on, they've reduced their income tax, they've increased their heritage fund, they've been able to do those kinds of things when the prosperity was booming. And we've been told that BC is booming. And the result of that booming, who's benefiting? You're paying far more taxes, I'll be paying more taxes, everyone will be paying substantially more in taxes. And that's supposed to be a booming economy.
But doesn't it frighten you when you look at 33% of the provincial budget going for health, with the doctors still making a decision as to whether or not they will extra bill?
I suppose the thing that frightens me is that we're told that in spite of the $1 billion increase in revenue that's going to be taken away from us, in addition to that, we're told that we're going to be paying more in Medicare premiums. And I mentioned Saskatchewan, where they have no Medicare premiums at all. They manage their economy much better than we do, obviously.
Now, I took it up with Curtis, and perhaps you can argue or disagree with me, that it looks to me like the old social credit ploy of underestimating your revenues on your natural resources. Has he got any cogent reasons, some in natural gas, for cutting down the possible revenue from petroleum, natural gas, mining and forests by $340 million?
I suppose he has his reasons, but I do agree with you, and that is that he is underestimating revenue and seriously overestimating expenditures. There are no new programs to speak of in the budget, yet he's going to spend $1 billion more in general expenditures, in budgetary expenditures. I just don't believe that's going to happen. I think they're piling up money that they're going to be able to pour into the Northeast coal development.
Well, he's only got, what, $40-odd million kind of assigned to the Northeast coal development?
Only $48 million, obviously, in the budget. But as I say, I think there's going to be the hidden surplus that will fortuitously be available a couple of years down the road to pour into Northeast coal development.
What do you think of his plan to build any government cola for the government based on the pre-tax price, in which he will up the price of gasoline by more than 7 cents a gallon, as Ottawa puts up the price due to the Alberta thing?
Well, it's the amusing, if there is an amusing side to that at all, it's that he says this is going to encourage conservation, and yet he estimates that the revenue from gasoline or from motor fuel tax is going to go from $220 million up to $360 million through that one device alone. So obviously he's not counting very much on conservation.
Oh, I forgot to ask him about heating fuel. Is heating fuel included in this, or is it exempted?
Heating fuel on commercial buildings, the tax rate on that is going up, and of course that gets passed on to us indirectly, but that's another thing about it. The indirect tax increases, apart from the $1 billion that's obviously in the budget, the $30 million increase in water license fees that was implemented last year against BC Hydro, and of course we all pay that when we pay our light bills. The user rates on all of the coastal ferries have gone up so much. The cost of doing business with government has gone up in every respect, and that's on top of the $800 million increase in taxes.
Does this budget not prove that, in fact, social credit is not really that much of a right-wing government, but very much a populist government? Did you not expect a kind of Reagan-Thatcher-type move to attempt to cut the expansion of the budget by 13%? I did.
We heard that 3 years ago, and again 2 years ago, the government was going to keep its expansion within the national growth, or the total growth. And of course, in this case, we see it growing by 20%. So he's abandoned that idea completely, obviously, quite apart from shifting the load even more to local taxpayers and more to municipalities. Let me note that one of the things that he talked about cutting back on last year when he was urging people to cut back in the budget and save money, one of the areas in which he cut back most successfully was in grants to local municipalities.
Mm-hmm. This year he has increased the grants to local municipalities a little bit, I do believe.
Well, yes, in the estimates. But as I say, last year when he wanted to cut back, well, that's one of the areas he cut back. So it's all right to put it down on paper now and say they're going to get more. But when it comes to paying it out, will they really get it? Is
there anything in the budget of which you approve, which you could say they've done the right thing?
Well, I believe the indexing, the further indexing of the income tax so that the people in the very highest income tax brackets will be paying a little more and the people in the lowest tax brackets will be paying less. To some extent, with the lower taxpayers, it makes up for the increases being levied against them. But of course, it does nothing to help the people who are not paying income tax and yet will be paying the additional 50% rate in sales tax, that will be paying the additional gas tax rates and all the other increases that have been implemented.
That's a classic, but the correct position for the NDP, of course, is that if you have no income, no taxable income, you're the one who is hit hardest by the increase from 4% to 6% in the provincial sales tax.
Exactly.
Soak
Yeah.
the poor in that case.
Yeah, well, because it's easy to get it from them, yes. There are a lot of them, and they don't really mobilize against the government except at election time.
One thing in which you're probably united with Curtis is that you don't object to the extra $28 million from booze and cigarettes.
Well, I suppose the rejection of that should come from the fact that we're not getting money from resources, not getting more money from resource development. As I pointed out, we gave away our resource industries. We have not yet implemented the measure promised by Mr. Barrett in late 1975 to increase coal royalties by $1 per ton. There's been no change really in coal royalties since the NDP had made a change in 1974.
Could he have done that? Could he have done that with the mention of it and the bill coming after the budget? Could he have increased the coal royalties?
It's possible, but revenue measures are historically introduced on budget day with legislation that follows immediately after the budget is introduced, and there's nothing in there. I'm not saying it can't happen.
This is a reverse question, but is this a good news budget for the NDP because it's a bad news budget for the ordinary people of the province of BC?
If we were facing an election this year, I suppose from a straight partisan political point of view, it would be good news for the NDP.
What about all the rumours I hear from Victoria that, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months? I don't believe them, but what do you think about the social credit's tactics facing election after this budget?
I've been saying that the only time this particular government ever increased the homeowner grant was in an election year, and if there wasn't an increase in the homeowner grant, there wouldn't be an election. There'll be no election, there'd be no increase. If anything, the load has been shifted more and more to local ratepayers, apart from the obvious $1 million increase in the budget.
$1 billion?
$1 billion.
You see, he caught me on that, but in actual increase...
From 5.6 up to 6.6.
That's right. Well, is that a real $1 billion additional, or is it, as Curtis said, to be $600 billion?
Well, he talks about the expenditures by putting money into special funds, but that money wasn't spent. Most of it's still sitting there in the special fund. But if you look at the expenditures, the budgetary expenditures, you'll see that the comparison is between 5.6 billion in the original estimates and 6.6 in the estimates.
The tax revenue from people and personal income tax, corporation and capital taxes, sales, fuel, property taxes is up $1 billion. Am I not right?
And the threat that the property taxes are going to go up further, because there is a line in the budget that says they're looking at the revenue from property taxes in unorganized territories that have not increased in recent years, and the implication is there that they're going to increase very soon.
More with Dave Stupich, the NDP Finance Critic. How long since you were Finance Minister, Mr. Stupich? 5 years?
December the 22nd, 1975.
After the break. Mr. Stupich, how is the recreation industry in Vancouver Island going to welcome the increase in the hotel room tax?
The recreation industry, I expect you mean the tourist industry.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I haven't heard any response from the tourist industry yet, although I would expect to hear one fairly soon. It's the government on one hand is promoting tourism and saying that this is a clean industry, it's good for the environment, good for the economy, we should be encouraging tourists, and there's a TIDSA program to encourage tourist development. And yet at the same time it's saying to the tourists, if you do come, we're going to soak you a little more to pay for our grandiose schemes in the province, the capital developments that we're promising, including Northeast Coal.
This effective rate of 11% of your assessment at actual value for your local taxation, does that mean very much? Or does it merely just give a little latitude to the municipalities as to what mill rate they will set to collect what money they need?
It does, in some municipalities at least, shift some of the load from residential to commercial and to industrial. But on the other hand, the budget does tell us that the government share of the total education cost, the percentage is dropping, has dropped steadily since this government was reelected. So in terms of total dollars, the individual taxpayers are going to be paying more in spite of his jiggery-pokery with figures.
It's a very tricky situation to understand, but we know this much, that health is now at 33%, Human resources is $800 million. Education is more than $1 billion. One day, won't we have to call a halt on these expenditures and take the economic consequences?
I hope not, Jack. In a province as rich as British Columbia is, and with the resources that we have and with the people that we have, I hope that we will be able to continue to supply our people with improved health services, improved educational services, and improved welfare. I think that's part of our role as government, to look after those who are unable to look after themselves, and certainly health is a very important.
We didn't get much into Ottawa bashing this morning, partly because we didn't have time and partly because I don't think it sells that well these days, does it?
Well, I'm concerned about it. I am a Canadian first. I'm a British Columbian, and naturally I want to look after British Columbian interests, but I'm very concerned about the attitude expressed by this government in last year's budget, when they said it's going to be very difficult to deal with Ottawa now that the Conservatives were defeated and the Liberals re-elected. And this year, it's throughout the budget, these nasty references about Ottawa's position and what Ottawa's trying to do.
Give me that figure again of the phoniness of the conservation pitch, because you say that motor fuel taxes are estimated to go up how much?
I believe last year's estimate was 220, and this year's estimate 362, or 300. It's a difference of about 47 million.
47 million. And of course with the...
I'm sorry, 147 million.
147 million.
It's about a 63% increase.
You agree with me that the biggest hit on the average person is going to be this roughly 7 cents a gallon on gas now, plus an increase every 3 months, plus Ottawa's increases, will be at $2 gas in no time flat.
Well, it's a big hit, but it's not as big as the increase in the sales tax levy, of course, which is going to go up again by 60%, but we're talking about much larger figures.
That was at 7%, went down to 4%, and up to 6%.
Yes, which is a 50% increase in the rate, but because of the inflation and because of the increase in buying in the economy, the budget anticipates an increase of about 65% in the revenue from that source.
What will your basic attack on this budget be? Because they have not cut services, they have increased the budget by 13%, he tells me. What will your basic attack on the budget be?
I suppose the minister's gall in saying to Labour that you have to be responsible in your demands at the same time as he is saying that obviously I'm going to take another $1 billion out of the economy apart from all of the hidden areas where I'm going to get more money. His gall in saying to Ottawa that we want to make a better deal with Ottawa at the same time as he's telling them what nasty people they are. His gall in saying that the economy is diversifying at the same time as he's talking about diversifying the places where our exports are going. But his gall in not getting more money for resource or from resource industries for the people of British Columbia, as has been done in Saskatchewan, as was being done in British Columbia when the NDP were in office.
So that's the gall of the budget?
The gall of the Minister of Finance in the way he read the budget, yes.
Well, he says it's his budget.
Well, I'm sure he has the support. I noticed yesterday when he was reading the increases in taxes, there seemed to be no surprise on the part of the caucus members. It would seem to me as though they were all in on everything that was happening.
So the fact of the matter is that when there is not an increase in the homeowner grant in a social credit budget, or for that matter an NDP budget...
No, that's not right, Jack. We increased it every year, as did Wacky Bennett. WAC Bennett increased it every year from the time he brought it in. We increased it every year. Yeah, so Creds have not increased it since the one time in 1979.
That's right, but he juggled, old Wacky juggled it in 3 different columns in his budget. You never knew what the devil was happening to
But you always knew there was going to be some kind of an increase in the homeowner grant.
One other little social note. I'm just looking quickly at the budget papers I only got this morning. And we no longer call the $7.7 billion contingent liability. We now call it guaranteed debt, I see. Did you notice that?
I noticed the difference in name, but again, that's another example of the minister's gall. He's saying that we're dealing with a balanced budget. And Jack, and he also talks about the total picture. It's like you saying to your wife, I'm going to balance my budget, and I'm going to help you balance your budget by guaranteeing $1.7 billion in loans for you to operate our family accounting on.
Mr. Stupich, I'm grateful for your cooperation this morning. You've helped us to understand it a bit better. And we'll just get ready, those who can afford and pay the load.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And watch Jack Monroe grind his teeth when he goes into negotiations with this in his hand.
There's no doubt about that.
Most unhappy. My thanks to Dave Stupich. I'll be back with a free-for-all on the budget after the break. I'm all alone by the telephone. You can't schedule anything special after the morning after the budget. And I made elaborate arrangements to get the budget last night so I could read it, but things went wrong and I didn't get them until this morning. But not, I think I understand most of it, and I'm prepared to try and field questions. I went after Mr. Curtis fairly aggressively this morning for obvious reasons. It's a bad news budget. It's not a good news budget. Up 13%, 6.6 billion. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. But the thing that, that worries me about it is an increase in tension in the labour climate. Now, I don't have to point it out to Monroe so that Monroe knows. Same with CUPE and the GVRD. Same with the VMREU. I was talking to some of the VMREU guys on the picket line yesterday, and they said, you don't do anything about our problem. And I said, well, you don't have a spokesman, as far as I know, in the VMREU. Not my fault. I'm prepared to put almost anybody on the air with an axe to grind or a cause to shout about. Where am I going? I'm going to telephones. With a gentle push of the button. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster, and how are you this morning?
Well, I'd rather cut out the
3 or 4 areas, very briefly, I'd like to touch on. How much money is in government special funds? I like to call them slush funds, because that's basically what they are. Point 2, unions and strikes, and how is this
Hold on a second, please. Hold on a second, please.
The employment market in the province of BC as it is.
It's deaf.
And government waste. And my final comment would be, how can you balance a budget and yet increase it? I mean, this doesn't seem to make sense.
Well, obviously, your last question is a silly one. You balance a budget by increasing your taxation to balance it.
I'm not a budget-inclined person, but I was wondering...
Okay, that's point number one. Point number one. He goes on forever. Let me answer his question. In the special purpose funds, as of this particular date, there is in the special purpose funds, would you believe it, $1 billion. Downtown revitalization funds. First of all, there's a mortgage program. Crown Land Fund, 170 million. Downtown revitalization, that must be BC Place. 13 what? Million. Farms, forests and range resource funds, Fraser River Crossing Construction Fund, Lottery Fund, Lower Mainland Stadium Fund, 16.7 million. Northeast Coal, 10.1 million. Provincial Home Acquisition Fund, $307 million. In all in special funds, there's $1 billion. I presume that's real money. Don't know. And you balance the budget by increasing your tax revenue to match your expenditures. But what social credit has always traditionally done, I don't think the NDP did it, is they underestimate what they think they're going to get. In other words, for petroleum and natural gas, which is dicey, but which has been down this year because of a very mild winter and also competition from other fuels in the United States. If there's a hard winter or a hard fall, that'll go way back up again. And forests, if there is a strike this year, they'll be right in underestimating their forest revenue. If there is not a strike, they'll probably pull in an extra $200 million. Next call. Good morning.
Jack, I just want to make a quick comment from an ordinary British Columbian.
That's what I want this morning.
Good, because my husband is a union man. Not a very strong union man, I must add. He's never voted for strike. Okay, when he came home last night and saw this budget, he says, if my union goes this year and we're up for a new contract, if they vote for strike, I have to go. We cannot keep up with this increase. The inflation is so much. How can we keep up? I can't afford to buy gas to go to work anymore.
Yeah. You see, the whole world has changed. The expectations of a decent living standard, decent wages, and affluence are now solidly entrenched in our society.
Yeah.
20 years ago, some people were prepared to suffer at the low end of the totem pole. Now they're not. And therein may well lie the seeds of our economic destruction in due course, unless these finks in Ottawa and Alberta, these people in Ottawa, Alberta, and British Columbia can get their act together and start to worry about the economy of the country. And also reduce some of the waste in government, which I agree that there is much.
Well,
but I can understand your husband's viewpoint. When he looks at this budget, he says, this time I'll vote for a strike.
Well, they're saying that the welfare is so much expensive?
$800 million.
Yeah, well, my husband said, well, we might as well go on welfare. You know, we'll make more money. So their budget is going to have to increase for welfare if they keep this up.
I'm afraid so. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Good morning, sir.
You know, I did come from Europe a few years ago, and I'm a Canadian citizen.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me sick now with people like Curtis come bring out a ridiculous budget like that. The people of BC, they work, and we got the beautiful province and most income, and they go and try to take everything away by the people right now are working, few of them, and most of them on strike, and they're going to say we're going to increase this and this and this, and the people's money. That's just like communism.
Well, it's not all social credit's fault. Let's be quite honest about it. The way they handle it might not please some of us, including yours truly, but we can't blame it all on them. The growth of bureaucracy and government and the expectations of the public in services is now quite incredible and must be met. And I venture to say that down the road we'll have a nice, grey, egalitarian, equal type of dull society in which everyone will be vaguely happy, but which a lot of the spark will have been taken out of. But we can't escape this egalitarian bureaucracy which faces us now. That was a clumsy sentence, wasn't it? In fact, I got lost. Go ahead, please.
Oh, good morning, Jack.
Yes.
I'm an average taxpayer, and you said it. It's the growth of government, growth of bureaucracy, and this would be a most appropriate time for somebody to get working, any party, to get working on one thing, and that would be Proposition 13. To cut back on the excess spending and the squandering of the taxpayers' money. I don't know whether we're ready for it. That is belt tightening. I know that's why I feel that's why the Conservatives were not elected with Crombie's program.
With Crosby's program, the Conservatives made the mistake of telling people the truth.
Yeah.
And so they were defeated.
That's right. But when you hear of a $7.7 billion debt, do we want to incur that debt? Do we want to make it higher? I don't know with all the 2- and 3-car garages. I don't know whether the people are prepared to belt tighten.
No, they're not prepared to belt tighten now or in the future. Our belt will be tightened by international events in due course, and that's when the crunch will come, after the break. Well, good morning.
Good morning, Jack.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
Oh, not very good. I've been listening to the finance minister and the NDP Finance Critic, and although I can't compete in their ball game, I do realize what's happening to me personally as a working man. I listened to your comments about the egalitarianism that's facing us, and I wonder what's down the road on a real sense for the working man and family. Are we can all see our dollar shrinking. Our buying power is slowly leaving us.
If you haven't got an index pension down the road, you're dead.
Are you kidding? The only people that have index pensions are the government people, and everybody else has to suffer.
That's right.
Right. Well, where do you think this is realistically going to end up? Do you think, isn't it possible that we're facing the kind of civil unrest that they have in other countries, like in Italy, for example?
Well, I think the first stage is going to be this incredible increase in inflation, which will not get as bad as pre-war Germany, because nowadays we've got transfer payments. Even though we're inflated, the money is distributed in some measure to most Canadians, whether it's by unemployment insurance or human resources. In the good old days, there was such an incredible disparity between those who had in post-war Germany and post-war Britain and those who hadn't. And that resulted in the incredible depression of the 20s and the 30s. Along came Hitler and saved the Western economy in a most obtuse, disgusting, obnoxious, repulsive way, in that he proved to the governments of the Western world that they could produce without credit, that they could make things for war, expend them, and start rebuilding again afterwards. And then we got into started in Britain and Sweden, I suppose, with the Beveridge Report and the the social welfare schemes, which are now totally and absolutely essential for ordinary people. The fact that we share so much of the tax payments is some protection. Maybe we should just swallow inflation and accept it and hope that along with inflation one day, productivity by technology will enable us to earn enough on world markets to survive. But it's a question of, I was talking to a business group the other day and I was really quite rough with them. I gave my usual attack on feather-bedded layabouts and the civil servant who make extraordinary demands, right? And they all clap. Good old Webster, he's a reactionary. And then I said to them, but in this audience at this moment are all kinds of people who are living high off the land with stock market scams and real estate flips. We have the other end of the coin where a large number of people in this country are unrestricted, unlimited, uninhibited free enterprisers who are doing very well, fine, thank you, on the tax dodges and fiddles. And I'm a little bit afraid that this kind of fiddle, dodge, scam will come to the state where it is in Britain today, where nobody pays income tax. That's what John Ford told us the last time he was here, that 20% of the British people operate on the fiddle. I suppose if you wanted to really look at a solution, you would say Canadians must work harder. Canadians must pay their taxes. Canadians must cooperate in sharing of the country's resources from coast to coast. And yet, again this morning, just to digress for a moment, I watched Reagan this morning. I watched him on Canada AM. I listened to Trudeau this morning. I've heard all the experts in the East talk about the fish and the scallops and the acid rain. Not a single mention that they're preparing to pick a fight with Reagan down east on Eastern issues, that we are very open to attack by the Americans on a trade reciprocity fight. Supposing, for instance, that Reagan gets so mad at Trudeau when they talk about Cuba or Salvador or North-South relationships that things get bad and they put some difficulties in the way of the export of BC lumbers politically. God help us. And to me, when I was watching Reagan this morning, I once felt again that separation caused, shouldn't say this, but I will, by the control of the communications in this country by the Eastern media mafia. I got off the topic a little bit, but I hope I made some sense.
Well, I just can't help but feel unrest within myself, and I can only assume that others of a similar nature are feeling it also, and I wonder where it's going to end. I mean,
don't know.
My father and my father's father and other people's fathers have expected to and have achieved the dream of the average American person, being that they own their own home and they raise their own family.
How can you own your...
Myself, I don't think I'll ever be able to afford to buy a home.
Even that particular class of society of which I'm not very fond, the two young professionals working and making $50,000, $60,000, even they can barely afford to buy a house in Vancouver today.
Exactly.
What does the ordinary joker do?
Where's it all going to end? How do you think that the average person is going to stand and watch the money being taken out of their hands?
God knows.
That's all I really wanted to say.
Thanks for cheering me up. Thanks for cheering me up.
That I feel, and I'm sure that there are a lot of others feel it too. And I just wonder where it's going to go.
No idea.
Well,
thank you. Next call. Your Worship.
Hello, Jack.
Is that Mike Harcourt?
Yes, it is.
Good morning, Mr. Harcourt.
Good morning, Jack.
I'm not going to ask you about the budget on this occasion. I want to ask you about what's happening to Crofton Manor. I've taken a great interest in this story when it was originally broken, from the time when the old people there, paying between $900 and $1,000 and $1,100 a month, were given an arbitrary, cold-blooded notice to get out by August the 1st. And I know that a committee of people, of the relatives, and of perhaps the residents themselves have come to you for help, and that despite the strike and your shortage of staff, you may be able yet to help the residents who have not found a place to live other than the one from which they must get out. Can you tell me what you're doing?
Well, Jack, we talked about this earlier, you recall, and I said that the Community Services Committee of Council was going to look at it and find some remedy. Unfortunately, we've canceled all of our committees at City Hall, so I've short-circuited the process and told the people that came to see me yesterday to direct a letter to the mayor and members of council next Tuesday at our meeting, asking for a stand by the council on the issue of Crofton Manor and the dislocation of all of these elderly people. And basically what I'm suggesting is that we as a council let it be known that we're not prepared to rezone that site so that it can be turned into expensive apartments. which is my anticipation of what's being requested.
Could you freeze it for its current use?
Well, we don't have to freeze it. We basically just say that we won't rezone it. It's got to stay exactly the way it is. That's the reason it was rezoned originally, to provide a seniors care facility. We put in some very strong conditions to maintain that, and we're assured regularly that those would be met by the developers and owners.
Neil B. Cook Limited, yeah.
And there's been a welching on that deal, and I certainly don't see council backing down from saying that rezoning to a care facility from a single-family zoning was done to offer a service to the people of Kerrisdale and surrounding areas for decent care for senior citizens. I don't see council backing down on that one iota, and the sooner we get that explicitly stated, the better, and I'm hoping it'll be next Tuesday.
That means that it would have to be used in its present operation or not used at all.
Well, it would make it very difficult for the owner to come in and seek a rezoning, because in my opinion, he won't get it as far as I'm concerned, and I hope the majority of council go along. Secondly, he cannot get a demolition permit unless he has a development permit, and he can't develop it for anything else than what he's got right now. And in any event, he couldn't get a development permit because he'd have some real problems with a number of other problem areas.
Well, it's encouraging to know you're taking such a personal interest in it, Your Worship, because
I'd like to see it maintained, Jack.
Even people with money are entitled to the kind of interest and help from the public that people without money get as a matter of humanity and compassion.
Well, that's my old community, eh? I grew up in Kerrisdale.
Well, thank you very much. Have you had a chance to look at the budget?
Yes, I have, Jack.
One word?
One word is didn't see any help for housing, transit, tax, educational tax relief. I'm disappointed.
No election.
Listen, if you want to be defeated, I'd run on that sort of a budget.
Thank you, Your Worship, Mayor Michael Harcourt of the great city of Vancouver.
Okay, Jack.
Thank you. I'll be back after the break. That camera. Follow the little red light, my mother always told me. What do you think of the budget?
Terrible.
Would you vote social credit again?
I was just making some of the comments that some of the people have made to you, Jack, and one of the things you were mentioning was where people today are not ready to tighten their budgets. I'm a wage earner, the same as many other people in this province, and if I want to buy something, I have to consider how I'm going to pay for it. I think, in my opinion, the government itself also should be taking the same thing into consideration. And they're trying to justify larger expenditures by saying they're giving the people what they want. To me, they should be the leader in the field of tightening a budget and of tightening the money that they're going to spend.
All right, what would you cut? I mean, that's not a fair question to you, but what would you cut? Would you cut health care?
No, I wouldn't cut health care. I think taxation on
natural resources,
tobacco, on liquor, which is a matter of a person's personal health in a lot of respect. Let's say if you want to kill yourself, well, they're making it more expensive to do so. If you want to smoke or if you want to drink yourself to death, okay, that's fine. You know, gasoline, I'm from Europe, so are you, Jack, and I think you would go along with me in respect to the fact that gas here in Canada is considerably cheaper than what it costs in Europe, and we're very fortunate in that respect, but I wonder how long it's going to be before we're going to catch up with them.
Any economic realist would tell us that what we should have done was bring the gasoline, the fuel prices up to a realistic level, suffered the economic downturn that would happen until we readjusted, which is what they did in Europe.
Well, I agree with you.
And we don't have the guts to do it here because we're afraid of, properly so again, I'm gutless too, mass unemployment, even for a short period.
Well, we buy smaller cars, Jack. More economical cars. But what I really can't comprehend is I'm a homeowner, and I wonder sometimes if I'm fortunate or unfortunate to have a home. Sure, it's gone up a lot in value. My taxes are going to go up on my property. I suppose if I rent, I'll have to pay for the increased taxes of the person that owns the property that I'd be renting from. But by the same token, you don't know where you're going to get hit from. Your dollar purchasing power is depleting every day.
Even the person.
I don't know. Someday I think it might be very interesting to sit down and figure out just how much money one has left after they've been hit with all these taxes.
Well, you know, it's a very tricky situation indeed. I don't know. I'll tell you, when I'm 65 anyway, I'm going to defer my taxes, and I advise people of 65 and over who are property owners not to hesitate to defer their taxes against the eventual sale of the property when they go to that great, wonderful Valhalla in the sky.
Yeah, but what's the solution though, Jack? You know, people have so much money to spend to purchase things. They can't count on their employer to give them X percentage of increase every year. The government is the only business I know that's run on the philosophy of, well, what the hell? If we don't have enough money, we can always go to the people and tell them, you owe us more.
Wait till you see the GVRD settlement. Apart from that 17.9 over 2 years offered quietly and secretly by the Vancouver School Board to help their friends in CUPE and VMREU, I'll bet you the CUPE settlement now gives a large measure of equal pay for supposed equal work, and I stress supposed equal work, and I'll bet you the wage bill of the local government in the Lower Mainland goes up by anything from 20 to 50% on your back.
Well, that's correct, and I think that's what's really frightening, you know.
But who's got guts enough in this country to call a halt and make people suffer?
Well, just how big an ear do people have? You know, how much longer can it take it being stuck to them? How much complacency have people got so they can just sit back and say, oh well.
Maybe we need a new political party. But what kind of political party? I don't know.
Well, one that has enough guts to, I suppose I'm not a Clark fan, but...
You want a Maggie Thatcher?
Realistically.
Do you want a Maggie Thatcher?
Her philosophies don't seem to be working all that great, do they?
Do you want a Ronald Reagan?
I don't think Ronald Reagan is altogether too wrong. He sure as hell isn't making himself overly popular right now, but then I guess when you're facing reality, reality is not always the most popular issue.
You know, I hate to say this when you think of the old-time 69-year-old movie star who could have a stroke at any moment, but it may be the first time that Trudeau's been up against a guy who will not budge.
Well, at least you can say one thing for the guy. He makes a decision. Not many people. I work for a very, very large corporate company, and to try to get them to make a decision on just the smallest issue is just a joke.
All the same as civil service. Much obliged.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take one more caller. How much time have I got?
Hello, Jack.
Would you vote social credit on that budget?
Hello?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes. I don't know. I don't like the budget, and I'm just one of your ordinary little people, but I wonder if perhaps we're in trouble now, but don't you think a system of education for people as to this business of government being they and we being they and we don't get together?
Ma'am, you close on a very good point. It's all us. We pay the whole bill. We control the politicians. When it goes wrong, it's our fault, and God help us. After the break. Tomorrow morning, we're still planning a program, I do believe.
We're planning. We may work late, but we're planning.
And Steve is out doing a program. I've got all the exemptions here from the Social Service Tax Act, which I was going to include draft beer. Anyway, there's the budget. Chew on it and pay the bills. That's all you can do. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. precisely.